Sources say Saudi Arabia's public investment fund is in talks with Boeing and Airbus about an order for 80 jets. Now, this would be the first purchases for the new national airline. Simone Foxman has more. So this is about getting your swag on in the global airline industry, isn't it? What more do we know about this airline project? Simone?
Yeah, certainly a pretty massive deal here. We don't know exactly which company will ultimately take the pie or whether or not they'll split some of these 80 new planes that Saudi Arabia is looking to purchase. We do understand that Saudi wants to purchase about 40 directly and then is pursuing purchase options for the remainder. We also saw that important news last week as we're talking about what this airline looks like, that Tony Douglas is stepping down from Etihad. He is widely expected to become the head of this second new national airline. We do understand that this airline likely to focus a bit more on Riyadh, focus on global transfers rather than Saudi, which is focused very much on Jeddah market as well as pilgrimage options. But I also want to point you to that agreement coming out, or that announcement coming out over the weekend about efforts to make Saudi Arabia a supply chain hub, a supply chain initiative announced by Mohammed bin Salman, where would entail investments of $2.7 billion, 10 billion Saudi riyals, aimed to attract about 40 back to try and make Saudi a manufacturing hub. And I note this because cargo has become such an important piece of regional airlines, competitive pricing, their financials. You look at Qatar Airways Cargo, making a lot of money for them, and maybe that's something that Saudi Arabia wants to do with its new airline as well.
Yeah, and then sticking with Saudi Arabia, we got word that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is expected to skip an Arab summit in Algiers next week. What are some of the geopolitical considerations here as we start off the week?
Yeah, well, commentators were really quick to note that this was the second summit he was going to miss in Algeria so far this year. But then we had the royal court come out and say, actually, he has an inner ear condition. This makes it difficult for him to travel. And frankly, he hasn't traveled a lot since at least the pandemic began. But I think this really underscores how much attention there is on Mohammed bin Salman at the moment, particularly as these disputes with the United States over the OPEC Plus decision to cut 2 million barrels per day in production really seemed to escalate. We saw Amos Hochstein, the senior advisor to the Biden administration, on CBS yesterday. He called that OPEC decision a big political statement. He said it was not warranted for economic reasons. And of course, we're going to be watching, and Yusuf, you're going to see it yourself, who shows up at the FII conference in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh this week. We expect major players from Wall Street, but do we get anybody else, particularly from the United States? So a lot of attention right now on Mohammed bin Salman, on his movements, where he goes, and certainly this Algeria meeting, just maybe the beginning of that.
Yeah, I mean, can't blame the Crown Prince. I mean, I've skipped the event about 9 times in the last 10 years. It's rarely eventful. In the meantime, let's talk about Qatar Energy. They announced a new partnership with Shell on the latest phase of its gas expansion project. What were some of the highlights?
Yeah, Shell getting a 9.375% piece of what's called North Field South. This is the second phase in a massive gas LNG production capacity expansion plan that Qatar has been undergoing. And this comes just 3 months after Shell signed a deal for a piece of North Field East. That was the first phase of this project, underscoring the close relationship between Shell and Qatar Energy, seemingly ongoing. Two things that really stood out to me. I was there at the press conference yesterday. One, Saad Sherid Al-Kabi, the CEO of Qatar Energy and also the energy minister, saying that some buyers had already finalized supply agreements with Qatar Energy for that gas supply. NFS expected to come online in 2027. The first stage expected to come online in 2026. We hadn't seen a lot of agreements there. Number two, Ben van Beurden, the outgoing CEO of Shell, saying he has actually positive expectations, optimistic expectations about what may happen with the gas plan for Europe, that it might be both positive for markets as well as consumers. Obviously, this is a hot story, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about this in the coming weeks.